Welcome to the I Empower podcast, where stories become art and art becomes important reminders. Each week, we dive deep into the story of a special person who discovered their power against all odds. But wait, it doesn't stop there. All of the inspiration that comes from each story is then memorialized into a single unique painting that can be purchased in limited print quantities. So if you, my friend, are looking to step out of your own way and into your life's potential and well-deserved happiness, this is the place for you. Let's listen in.
You really only get one life, so use it wisely.
So welcome, Sam, to the show. I'm super excited to have you on and talk to you about your incredible story of transformation. So I always like to tell my listeners and viewers a little bit about where I found you from. Actually found you on TikTok through one of the inspiring stories that you posted about your journey. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is incredible. I have got to know this girl some more. So yeah, Sam, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, I'm Sam. I am I was born in New Mexico. I currently reside in Arizona. I am, trying to seek as many people as possible to share my story to, because honestly, my main goal now as a recovering addict is to help other people, on their journey and realize that there is hope, that it's possible. I have 4 kids. I am married. We live in, Gilbert. I'm 28 years old, and like I said, my main goal is to just be there for anybody that may be struggling with addiction or alcoholism.
That's so amazing that you're embracing your story and so bravely sharing it with others. So I'm super interested in. I went back and watched through some of your TikToks today, get a little bit more information. But I definitely want to hear it from you. So yeah, if you don't mind, just sharing your story, like where it all started, and then where you are now.
Yeah. So it's kind of a long story because it's very intricate. It's very colorful. The person that you are looking at today is not the person that I was even 6, 7 years ago. Basically, what happened when I was a child? I have 2 sisters. My mom and dad. We all ended up moving overseas to the Middle East. I grew up on a small little island called Bahrain, and we started a Christian church out there in the Middle East. And the whole time we were always looked at as if we were under a microscope. Everyone was looking at us like these prodigy children that everyone should look to as an example. In hindsight, and my parents have seen it as well, it was pretty detrimental for us because there was always that early feelings of shame, of guilt, of not being good enough. We were looked at under a microscope. And so as a child, that's hard to really like learn from your mistakes and grow from them, because you're expected to be an embodiment of perfect. And so anyways, I grew up there until I was 11. Then when we moved back to the States, we moved back to Scottsdale, Arizona. And if you don't know anything about Scottsdale, it's very bougie. It was very, very different from anything that I had ever known. And moving all across the world, I had to leave who I considered my family. Those were my best friends. Those are the people I have known my whole life. And so then I moved to Scottsdale, where I didn't know any American culture. I didn't know that you were supposed to wear shoes outside. I didn't know that you're supposed to lock your doors, because we lived in like a very sheltered area. It was very safe. We were always outside, always with friends. And then in the States, it was a very different feeling. So right away, I felt like I didn't belong. I didn't feel good enough. I was so insecure. I remember, the earliest stages of my addiction and my disease was feeling such a shame, that I wasn't who I needed to be. I never really felt like I belonged. And so, from early stages, I was cutting myself. I had all types of eating disorders. I went from anorexia to bulimia, back to anorexia. And then anything to really try and bring a little bit of serotonin, try and make me feel better. Cause I felt like I had this like void, this void inside of me that I needed to, fill with something to make me feel better.
Yeah.
And so basically when I was 13, and I say I've been addicted to drugs since I was 13 years old because I was young. I started with smoking cigarettes. Me and my sister would go outside. We would, find whoever in their right mind would give 13-year-olds cigarettes.
Yeah.
We would have people buy us packs of cigarettes. And that's where like the sneakiness started, the rebelliousness. I wanted to, shy away from Christianity. I wanted to shy away from the church, because my dad is a narcissist, right? So I grew up under a narcissist where everything was about him. And it was really hard because I never, as a narcissist, you don't really know how to love somebody the way that they should be loved. It's all
No.
about them. And so that also played into a part of how I didn't feel like good enough as a child. But I wanted to shy away, rebel from all of it. And so when I started smoking weed, I was really young. Quickly, emphasize quickly, I progressed to taking mushrooms. I progressed to drinking all the time. That's what me and my friends did when we were young. Is we drank. We would go steal bottles of Popov, the cheap liquor from the
Yeah.
store. Get drunk. It was terrible. And then, just to mention, I know I mentioned some eating disorders, but my weight fluctuated so much as a child, and as a girl, you want to feel pretty and skinny, and you want to like this idea of perfection and
Right.
what a woman's body should look like. It played a big part into why I fell in love with cocaine in the first place. Is because I lost weight. I felt, comfortable in my own skin. I was just happy to, I was happy to finally feel like, finally feel
Good.
happy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it felt good, and I didn't really want to eat. And I was just shedding all these pounds, and boys started noticing me. And I was like, oh, this is the answer. Like I found the
Yeah.
answer. And so from there, I was 15. Actually, I was 14. I tried Percocets, which is an opiate for anybody that's listening that doesn't know what a Percocet is. It's an opiate. And for me, I was so naive at the time because I was young and, I didn't realize what the consequences were. And that's really like, I could have cared less what the consequences were because, I was suicidal and I just, didn't necessarily want to live anymore.
Yeah.
And so when I tried Percocets, I just transformed into this, rising phoenix where I could do whatever I wanted. And I had, the strength to say how I felt. And I was not shy. And I was just like this, this person that was walking on a cloud. Anyways, after a couple weeks of taking it and I didn't have any, I got sick. The withdrawal started kicking in. I didn't realize what was happening to myself. I didn't understand why I was getting sick. It was very confusing for me. And so I just knew like in my head I needed more. And I needed to continue to fill that monster. And so what I did was, when Percocets got too expensive, I ended up starting to buy heroin because it's a cheaper form of an opiate. You can get it,
Right.
it's more accessible other than if you're getting something prescribed from a doctor. If you have a heroin dealer, you are pretty much set. I started, doing heroin and I never smoked it. I was always an IV drug user. I had a boyfriend at the time who would shoot me up with drugs. He was also addicted himself. And at first, when I caught him doing heroin, I, pretended to be upset, but really I think it was a jealousy. I was like, I want to do that. You look
Yeah.
like you feel good right now. I want
Yeah.
to feel like that. So, and probably about a couple days later, I ended up asking him to shoot me up with heroin, and he did, and we progressed from there quickly, very quickly. My life went immediately downhill. When I was so that whole time between the ages of 14 and 18, I was still semi living under the roof of my parents. At one point, they got sick of me. They decided to kick me out. My parents ended up getting a divorce at that time. I think it was just so much stress. There was so much toxicity in the house. My parents were both not happy. My sisters weren't happy. My sisters were struggling with the same things: alcoholism, addiction. All of us were just in a really toxic spot. At one point, I broke up with the guy that I was dating, who taught me how to shoot up, and then I ended up dating my heroin dealer. And then I ended up moving in with him. And so when you have your addiction at your feet, you have all the tools you need to get high. This sense of like euphoria comes over you that like, I'll never need to get sick again. Because when you wake up and you're addicted to opiates, you're sick all the time. Like you just feel like you have this immense flu, your legs hurt, your muscles hurt, you feel like hot and cold, everything's so sensitive. Like it's horrible. And so to feel like, oh, I've got an endless supply of drugs that I can use and I won't have to feel like this anymore, I'm set for life, in my
Right.
mind.
Right.
I'm like, okay, this is perfect.
Yeah.
We ended up going through some really dark times. As a heroin dealer, you're kind of always a target for other people. And so, one of the turning points was when we were living together. We ended up having a really bad home invasion happen to us. And it was this guy who had recently gotten out of prison, and he ended up coming to try and do an armed robbery to take the drugs, the money, all of that. And we're just sitting in the room, and they ended up shooting up the whole place. They shot his brother, his sister. They shot him 3 times. Ruben, the guy I was dating at the time, ended up getting up and shooting and killing the guy, all right in front of me. And I'm sitting there completely unscathed. Nothing happened to me, which, I was crouching in a corner. So, I mean, it's not expected. I wasn't the target. But even something like that did not stop me from using drugs. I progressed from there. Like it was even worse than it was before. During these durations, I got arrested probably about 8 different times, on and off. I got arrested, and I had been put on probation. They tried everything.
Yeah.
And as an addict, if you're not ready, you're not ready. So
Right.
I ended up getting put on probation in one county. In another county, I got put on probation. They tried an ankle bracelet. And of course, me trying to be a free bird, I'm like, nope, this is coming off. I took it off. I went on the run. It was in the same city, but it was like I was hiding, in different motels and stuff. And eventually they caught up with me. And so the last time they caught up with me, they put me in jail. I kept getting, what's called page 2, where your charges just keep piling on. They take you back to court. You think you have like a sentencing, and then no, you have to go back to court for different charges that keep popping up because they search the system, and anybody that wants you, they will bring you into court for warrants and stuff. But I remember there was a point when I got arrested, and I was sitting in this, the horseshoe is what it's called in Arizona. And I just felt like this sense of relief. Like I was finally done running. That's when I knew like that is the last time I ever did drugs, which was about I would say actually it's about 8 years ago at this point. That was the last time I did drugs, and I was happy to not be running anymore because that lifestyle is so exhausting. You're sick all the time, and you're always running from people that want what you have, and you're lying and you're cheating and you're stealing, and it's horrible. Like it really is just like such a shameful lifestyle. I felt like a pathetic person, and I was never happy. There was many times I tried to do too much, to end it all. There was many overdoses and things that happened. But when I was arrested and I knew they weren't going to let me out, I had this like sense of relief just wash over me. I felt better. Like, I felt like this was a new beginning.
Yeah.
When I got arrested and I got page 2, I stayed in county for about 3.5 months. And finally they sentenced me to prison. They sentenced me to DOC. Mm-hmm. And the day that I got there, they do all these checks on you. They do these tests, make sure that you've got no TB, whatever. And they did a pregnancy test on me, and they found out that I was pregnant, which, looking at the timeline, the day before I had gotten arrested was the day that I would have started that pregnancy. And so it was so perfectly timed to where my baby was healthy, safe the whole time. Like, she was inside me the entire time, but they didn't know about it in county. And so when I got to DOC, I was already about 3.5 months pregnant, and I was already sentenced to I was sentenced to 3 years with 2.5 years of IPS afterwards. And so I had already known my fate. I knew that at some point I was going to have my baby, and and have a family member take care of her, which was the route that I did go. But that was the moment in time when I found out I was pregnant that I knew I wanted to be better. Like, I had to be better, for
Yeah.
her. I just, it wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about me. And, you take away the drugs and the person comes back, the real person comes back, with all their flaws, all their, all of their character defects, with all of the love that they used to have, it comes back. And, when I found out I was pregnant, I just knew I wanted to be a different person. And so that is really when I started my journey of recovery. I ended up having her and was with her for about 24 hours before I had to give her up, which was, another turning point. I was miserable. Like, it was the most miserable,
Yeah.
traumatic time I had ever gone through in my life. Anybody that's had a baby, all they want to do is nurture and foster that kid and be with them and make sure they're okay. And for them to just take her away, it was insanely difficult. I, still go to trauma therapy over it. It was a time in my life that kind of changed the chemical balances in my brain. It was horrible.
Yeah.
I went through a pretty bad postpartum depression where I stopped eating. I was not talking to anybody. I was just not okay. And when I got out of prison, I tried out the 12-step program of Narcotics Anonymous, of Alcoholics Anonymous. Was going to meetings. It didn't really catch on. Like, I knew that I was an addict, but I didn't realize that an addict means that there's different things in your life that you're trying to stuff down, that you're not taking care of. That's just a symptom of our addiction, our disease,
Right.
And so when I wasn't taking care of, like, the things, trauma from my past or anything, from my past that I should have been taking care of, I started drinking, and that's why my sobriety date is 8/18/18 at this point, because I decided to sober up at that time. I really did some step work with my sponsor. I found out that I am super insecure. I found out that I have a ton of character defects. I'm a people pleaser. I want everyone to like me. And all of these things were part of the reason why I wanted to use drugs, because they made me feel like I was pretty. They made me feel like I was good enough, different things. So, now I have an incredible life. I'm married with 4 kids. 3 of them are stepkids, but they're my babies. I
Yeah.
love them more than anything. I have a couple different jobs. I work in recovery now at a treatment facility, so I can work with other people that are really early on in sobriety, and it's always a reminder of why I do what I do, because you can see that they're hurting, they're struggling, and for me to be able to reach out and say, I've been there, I know what you're going through, but it does get better. That's really my whole purpose of working in recovery. I ended up taking a huge pay cut because I was working a job that I didn't like before, but it was golden handcuffs to where I was, like, making good money, but it was horrible, honestly.
Yeah.
And I also have, like, a business that I do at home. I do a couple of different things where it's like the beauty industry. I love the beauty industry. It makes me happy too. So I just try all the things. my life is like vastly, vastly different. I have sponsees that I work with to take them through the 12-step program. I was able to get my education. I got my business degree, my bachelor's degree in business, which is a huge accomplishment as well. I just, I can't like portray how different my life is than what it
Yeah.
used to be. It's like night and day. It's
Right.
just,
Oh
everything
my
is different.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's such an incredible story. Like you're telling me this, I'm having like cold chills, like when you're telling me certain things that you're going through, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like you are so strong. Let me just say that first of all, that like you are incredibly strong. I do want to like talk about a few things that you
Yeah.
had mentioned early on. So you were in essence, where you were in another country for a
Mhm.
good chunk of your life, it was like a
Mhm.
culture shock coming back for you, right? Do you think that
Yeah.
just, the culture shock on top of what is expected of you because of, the religious aspects of it, do you
Mhm.
think that that's what led to your self-esteem, I guess, is probably the
Mhm.
word that I'm looking for, because I know that I've talked to a lot of people, and like I can kind of connect with the whole self-esteem and like feeling like you are kind of like it's kind of like living a dual life.
Yeah.
I grew up, I didn't grow up super religious, but I did get real heavy into a church as a
Mhm.
young adult. And I always kind of felt like I had like this persona of like who
Yeah.
Jessica was in that.
Yeah.
And then like I didn't really know who I was as myself. So do you think that that played a big part in the reason why you kind of fell victim to your circumstances?
I think that has a huge part to play in it. Because I've done such extensive work like on my past and why I turned out the way I turned out and turned to the things I did. Um, the culture shock was so confusing. It was so
Yeah.
confusing. I grew up in a melting pot of different cultures, different races, different religions. Like it was literally every different type of person. And then I moved back to Scottsdale, which is very like one type of person. If
Mhm.
you're not that type of person, you're not really accepted into society.
I gotcha.
It's it's its own little culture here. And so I know that that played a huge part. I felt, compared to all my classmates, everyone I went to school with, I just felt so different, and I was like, what is wrong with me? I also think that like the my narcissistic father played a huge part into that.
Yeah.
My love language was a lot different than the way he was showing his love, when he was around, not focusing on the church. I think that a lot played into my self-esteem issues, where I had an older sister who was gorgeous, and all the girls, all the boys thought she was
Yeah.
cute, and she was skinny, and for me, I was like a chunky kid. Like I was chunky and dorky and like really just unsure of my body. Like I just always felt less than. And so, when I finally found a substance that was like making me skinny, I was like, this is perfect. I don't
Yeah.
need to, feel the way I felt anymore. So,
Yeah. And piggybacking off of that,
mhm,
my question was, because this is new, I'm learning. So,
mhm,
I don't know a whole lot about substance addiction. Do you think that originally, like, you were addicted to the feeling first before you became addicted to the actual drug?
mhm.
Because you hear about how addicting these chemicals are.
Yeah.
Um, and I was always curious, is it like, you take it and then you just decide to take it again because you feel good, and then you subsequently get addicted to the pill, or, the drug
Mhm.
itself. Do you think it starts off with an addiction to the feeling that you get first, and then you just keep chasing that feeling, and then evidently,
Yeah.
unfortunately, you end up getting addicted to the actual drug
Yeah.
itself?
It's definitely the feeling. Like the first time when I started doing drugs, I was addicted to the lifestyle, the rebelliousness of it. I was
Yeah.
addicted to the way that it made me come out of my shell, to the way it made me look, the way it made me feel, the whole difference that I felt when I was doing drugs, that was the addiction. The addiction was trying to fill this void that I didn't feel good enough, and that I didn't feel like I belonged, and that was the addiction, is trying to fill that void. So that's why I jumped from every drug in the whole entire world possible. That alcohol, cocaine, Xanax,
Right.
Percocets, literally anything I would do to try and fill this void. So the addiction was the feeling. It was.
Right. Um, I understand. That makes sense. I understand that. My question with the drugs, because after, I do research and I do try to like educate myself on these things. Um and then of course, in Hollywood how they portray drug use and things like that.
Yeah.
So you hear a lot about people trying out drugs, and then I guess their body, it's kind of like, maybe taking like an ibuprofen, and then it just doesn't
Mhm.
really do exactly what you need it to do. So then you take more, and then you take more, and then
Mhm.
a lot of people end up overdosing. Is that where you think? Because you said that you experienced
Mhm.
skirting the edge of it, of
Yeah.
overdosing, or you actually experienced that?
I've experienced overdosing before. So because it started with the Percocets, right? I started with like a 5 milligram Percocet, then it progressed to 10, because at some point you're just chasing the high that you got the first time, right?
I
You just want
gotcha.
that feeling. And so when the Percocets were too expensive and they weren't doing as much as I needed them to be doing at the time, that's when I quickly progressed to going full force into IV drug use, because I was like, okay, why not? I want to get high. I want to chase that first high. So I just went full force. When you're in the midst of your drug use, you know your limits. At the same time, you have different people selling you drugs. And so every batch is a different potency. You never know if there's fentanyl in there. You never know if it's cut with a lot of stuff. So you do the same amount every time, but the potency is always different. And so that's where a lot of overdoses come in. Like nowadays, they have fentanyl in everything. And so
Yeah.
that's why a lot of people are dying from opiates, is because they just don't know that it's in everything. um, for me, when I overdosed, there was a specific time I was in a bathroom, and I had done a ton of Xanax on top of heroin. And before that, when you're on Xanax, you're not fully functioning, right? So I didn't know like really what I was doing, but for me
Right.
to try and do like a shot of heroin on top of it was extremely dangerous. And on top of that, I locked myself in the bathroom. So I was in the bathroom for like 11 hours, and I just remember coming to when I like smashed my head on this glass table and broke it, and I heard my body heard it, but I didn't fully understand what was happening, and my entire body was like completely numb. So I was like coming out of an overdose, and no one had known, but I luckily made it out of there. But it was also due to mixing drugs. That's a big
Right.
part for a lot of people too.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important that you're sharing that, so that people do understand that
Mhm.
when you do compile drugs on top of drugs, even drugs with alcohol, that you can't really like say how your body's going to react to
No.
it, because I mean, today and tomorrow is different. Your body can
Mhm.
react. I would assume could react differently from day to day. And then
Yeah.
especially like you said, you don't know unless you're making it yourself, you don't
Right.
know what is in
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
and the strength of it. And so,
Right.
thank thank goodness that you were able to come through that. And
Yeah.
so was that like, what was that like for you? Was it scary for you when you came to? Did it take you a moment, or was it just one of those situations where you were just so caught up in the addiction and in the lifestyle that you were just like, okay, I made it through. Like, I'll be careful next time type situation. Like,
Yeah.
how did you respond to that? Like,
It didn't stop me.
yeah,
It definitely didn't stop me.
yeah,
I remember when I came to, I couldn't move my body. I thought I was paralyzed, but really I had just been sitting in the same spot for so long that my whole body was numb. Like I just couldn't feel it.
right,
Um, my legs didn't work. You know, it was the weirdest thing. It was almost like being paralyzed and sitting there and being like, oh shit, what did I do? You know, but as soon as I woke up, I think I did more drugs. You know, like it did
yeah,
not, because of the fact that I was so suicidal. Like I just did not care if I lived or died, you know, and so
okay,
I was like, oh, you know, I made it through, but we'll see what
yeah,
happens next time, you know?
yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty
Um,
toxic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing that you're able to be here with us today and like share your story and hopefully be inspiration to someone else that experienced the same thing. So, I mean, in case anybody didn't really like get the timeline, this happened very quickly
Quickly.
for you from a very young age.
Mhm.
Um, is this something that happens a lot with younger people, do you think? Like in your experience and going through the program
Mhm.
and then being a mentor for other people, is it something that like you experience as a younger, or how does is it all
Yeah.
walks of life? There's no pattern to it.
So there's a lot of people that experience it as younger people. However, everyone hits their rock bottom at different times. So a similar conversation that I hear happen a lot, or a similar story, is that everyone has this feeling of not being good enough, of needing to fill a void, of being the black sheep, of being different from a very young age, and a lot of people take care of that in different ways. Like I mentioned earlier, that I had tried to take care of it in different ways, like with eating disorders or trying to control
Yeah.
something with sex, with cutting myself, anything at the time to try and take care of it. But I just had a way to get drugs. I had a way, my friends, the people I hung out with were a little bit older. I just had the means to be able to do it. But everyone has a different way of taking care of things. That's why a lot of people go to alcohol. It's legal, it's easy to get, it's literally everywhere, and
Right.
so people will try to fill that void from a young age. I think that is a very common thing. However, it takes everyone different times to reach their rock bottom. For me, I'm extreme with everything that I do. Like, no
Yeah.
matter what, I take everything way too far. Um, there are some people that try to control it. They'll go to treatment, but I've also seen people that haven't hit their rock bottom until they were 40, 50 years old and just starting to try and rebuild their lives at that age. So
Yeah.
it really just depends on what they're trying to fill that void with, and when they find drugs and when they find alcohol to be, the poison that they're using.
Right. So I think the take back from that is, addiction doesn't have a face. It doesn't have an age. It doesn't have a gender. It doesn't have a race. Like it
No.
can happen. It can happen to anybody.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Doctors,
wow.
lawyers, it
Yeah.
does not discriminate anybody. You can be 8 years old, you can be 80 years old. It affects everyone
Yeah.
that is that uses addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about, if you don't mind, I want to talk about your experience in prison and
Mhm.
your story of you finding out that you were pregnant. And, because I'm kind of passionate about the I don't want to like I'm trying to choose my words properly.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about the mistreatment. There's a word for it, but like mistreatment of inmates.
Yeah.
And I want to know what your experience was with that, because I do think that there is a big hole in the system, especially with
Huge.
people who are in recovery or who suffer from addiction. How was like the rehab for you in prison? Was it a rehab? Like they just toss you in there and you have to withdraw on your own. Like there's no actual rehabilitation in the prison systems, and that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I definitely feel like there needs to be
There needs
more
to be,
done.
yeah, a
So,
lot more
can
done.
you tell me about your experience with that? Like what it was like? Because you were, in essence, you know, I don't know if you were high at the time that you were arrested,
Mhm.
but when you were in there, like you had to
Oh yeah.
experience that withdrawal on top of the
Mhm.
fact of finding out that you're pregnant. So I'm sure your emotions and your hormones are like going
Oh, it's
crazy, and there's
terrible.
like
Yeah.
yeah, so can you tell me about that?
Yeah. I was on, at the time I got arrested, I was hooked on Xanax, I was hooked on meth, and I was hooked on heroin. Three of like the top, top
Yeah, the
drugs
strong
to
ones.
withdraw from. They arrested me. And because they only test you for pregnancy the very first day that you get there, mine was too early on to detect.
Oh,
So looking back, I was stuck in a cage. I was stuck in a cage with really no resources. They took care. I had a bunch of scarring on my arms, so they were like, taking care of that, making sure that my arms were like wrapped up and things like that because they were like open wounds at the time.
yeah.
Um, However, I had to detox cold turkey from everything. There was really nothing to like help ease the pain. We didn't have good food, and me being pregnant, looking back at the time, I was missing patches of hair. Everything was, I was, it was rough. It was so rough. And I was literally in so much pain. I was laying face forward on the cell or on the bunk for like 18 hours a day. I couldn't even handle laying on my back because I was dizzy. I was kicking the walls. Like I was so uncomfortable, and there was nothing that was there to ease the pain. Because as somebody that's withdrawing too, a lot of the things that help is sugar. You want to have sugar. You want to be able to put something in your body like exercise, anything like a hot shower. Really, there was nothing. Um, and so when I finally got to prison, um, I had I had felt better. I wasn't withdrawing as bad because it was 3.5 months later. But I was completely clean that whole time, which was great. But then I got to prison, they found out I was pregnant. And typically, what should happen is in order to keep the baby safe, there needs to be like some sort of weaning from the drugs because if you withdraw too hard, you could lose your baby.
Right.
Um, and that just didn't happen for me. So, when I got there, it was never retested. There was really terrible health care in there. They don't really care. And, when I got there, I found out I was pregnant. I was okay. I was in a better spot. I got more food, really, but really that was it. They gave me one ultrasound the entire time I was there. Um, and then I ended up going over 2 weeks past my due date being pregnant. And they finally took me to the doctor and induced me. They were like, okay, let's get this baby out. But at that point, I was 9 months and 2 weeks pregnant, and it was absolutely horrible. And I just wanted the baby out. I wanted her
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So, as far as like treatment in there, though, to try and recover, there was maybe one meeting that happened. And that was it. That there was really no other type of like recovery in there. I was on a yard that was a medical yard because I was pregnant, so there weren't many resources. It was nothing. So
Oh my gosh, like my
yes,
heart, it hurts so bad right now. Like, I
yeah,
think it's easy for people to just, say, oh, well, they're criminals. So just
mhm,
lock them up and throw away the key, basically. Um,
yes,
and, realize people, I think, need to realize more that we're all humans. We
mhm,
all make mistakes. We all have our problems. And,
mhm,
you needed help,
yeah,
mentally and physically.
mhm,
And so you're saying that there was no rehabilitation as far as even mentally, like having any kind
no,
of like therapy or anything
nothing,
aside
no,
from physical.
Yeah, I was physically locked up, and that was about the best that they were doing. But as far as like programs, therapy, any kind of mental health, anything, it was non-existent. It was not there. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast and I wanted to come
Yeah.
on, and that's why I started sharing my story on TikTok, is because of the stigma that surrounds addiction and people that are using in active addiction. That, to be honest, that's our lowest point in time. That's our lowest point, lowest form, because we're not in our right minds when we're using. But
Right.
that's why I wanted to do this, is to try and break the stigma, because you know it, we're just sick, honestly. Like, a lot of
Yeah.
it comes from like early on mental health. I know I deal with so much anxiety, so much depression. I deal with like being happy and sad in the matter of like a couple minutes. Like, it's a roller coaster for me, and to try and make myself feel better was the main goal. But I'm happy I get to like share this, because I hope it helps break
Yeah.
the stigma a bit.
I hope so too, and I definitely feel like there needs to
Mhm.
be a movement because I've done my own research a little bit. Like I'm still learning, but I find myself angry because I've talked about period poverty too, and how that
Mhm.
correlates to the prison systems and
Mhm.
inmates, and how inmates have to buy their own products, and like so that like that's a whole nother story in
That's an
itself.
issue. Yeah.
But yeah, so what do you think could be done to fix this problem? Like, do you if you could just have
Mhm.
all the resources in the world to do what you think needs to be fixed because you
Mhm.
experienced this firsthand, and one of the most intense ways of experience is not only were you in addiction, you were pregnant and you had to carry your pregnancy through the
Mhm.
through the entire time of your incarceration and deliver, and then
Mhm.
you went back to prison. Is that correct?
Literally the next day, they sent me back, put me back in a cell for the remainder of my time. And there was really no health care afterwards either. So I had to heal up on my own. And they gave me some ibuprofen and Tylenol, and they're like, sent me on my merry way. So,
Yeah. And then you talked about postpartum depression too, and I
Mhm.
can connect with that because
Mhm.
after my recent child, I experienced that, and that is
Yeah.
something in a whole like that is intense for some
Yeah.
people. So like if you had all the resources in the world and you could do whatever you wanted, like how would you fix that problem? Like what do you think is the best way, firsthand experience to fix that?
There has to be better healthcare for inmates. Like healthcare in general. For example, I lived for a few years right across the way from a girl that had seizures. Horrible seizures, like grand mal seizures. She was always banging her head. And the reason that the seizures were not under control is because she couldn't get the proper medication, because there was really no, like, insurance doesn't cover it in prison. I don't really know the ins and outs of the healthcare and why they couldn't get her seizure medication, but they kept trying different types of medication and they weren't working. And so she ended up having to wear a helmet. She literally got different types of like brain defects because of how hard she was hitting her head. She was so confused. The day I saw her, when I first met her, was vastly different from the day that I left her, because she was there for a longer period of time than me. And she had different brain defects when I was leaving, and her husband ended up trying to sue the state, because of the fact that they could have prevented it. But at the
Right.
time, you're just a number. You're just a last name. Like, nobody cares about who you actually are and what you need. So if I had
Yeah.
resources, the healthcare system needs to be fixed. They need to provide women with the proper care. Women, men, anybody incarcerated, they need to
Yeah.
provide them with the proper care. Mental health, they need to provide some sort of mental health, whether that's even people coming into the prison to do something pro bono.
Mhm.
um, they have to have something there, because a lot of people are there from past traumas. There's different traumatic
Right.
events that send you to prison. It's never a
Yeah.
nice easy event that sends you there.
Yeah,
It's
like a
always,
one and done. There's a root cause to that.
yes. And it's always a traumatic event. There's not one story that I heard from somebody I was in there with that it was like, oh, this was what happened and it was great.
Yeah, I decided to
Never.
wake up today and
Yeah.
this is what happened.
Yes, I decided to go to prison today and it was
Yeah.
great. No,
Oh my gosh.
there has to be trauma therapy. There has to be mental health therapy. There has to be someone you can talk to, like just somebody that's not another inmate that you can
Yeah.
go sit with, like a guidance counselor, because even me having to give over temporary guardianship of my daughter when I had her, I had no legal resources. There was a librarian there that tried to help me, but he couldn't do anything better than like help me notarize the form. Like
Yeah.
that was it. The people that helped me were other inmates, and thank God that they were there because I did not have the resources on hand to be able to know, oh, this is what I need, or I would have had to give my
Yeah.
baby up for adoption.
Oh
There's
my
just nothing.
gosh.
There's no legal guidance. There's no, and especially if you come in there and you don't have money, then you
Right.
get the bare basics. You get like a couple of pads for your period. You get like, maybe a shampoo and conditioner, and that's it. Then you go without the things that you need. You get two pairs of pants, two shirts, and if you're there for, 3 years, then that's what you get. And you have to wash them yourself in your sink. Like
Yeah.
it's the lowest form that anyone could have somebody live in.
Right. And I think that that's what needs I think that people need to realize and just kind of like put their self in that situation and take a step back and look at the circumstances that
Yeah.
that that led up to, we don't know everybody's story, but like I
Mhm.
think the biggest problem is that we just, as a nation, as a society,
Mhm.
don't have compassion for people. And I think
No.
if we just had more compassion and understanding, that would, us on the outside looking in could,
Mhm.
having compassion towards those people. And then, I think if there was a movement that happened that could
Yeah.
just really try to, reform, I guess is the word that
Mhm.
I'm looking for. It's
100%.
just it's so sad, and like, and one of the things that my husband and I, we like to talk about is how there is no rehabilitation in prison. And
No.
then unfortunately a lot of people who go back, who are released back
Mhm.
into the same environments
Yep.
that got them to the place that they are now, and then just become a product, and it's just a vicious cycle because
Yep.
of the things that it makes it hard getting a job once you are considered a felon or you have a record.
So hard.
Finding work and then just being taken seriously. Like
Mhm.
there's just, oh my gosh, I could go on and on about
On
that.
for
But
days.
yeah, I
There's a
think
higher return rate to prison than there is to Disneyland, Disney World.
yeah,
There more
and I think
people
that
go
people
back.
need
Yeah.
and they need to realize that it's not the person in
Mhm.
particularly. I don't think people choose that lifestyle. I think that they're just victims of their circumstances, victims of their mental health.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so there is no rehabilitation that
Mhm.
goes on in the prison systems, and I think
No.
that that's really where it needs to start. And then of
Mhm.
course healthcare and just compassion and
Yeah.
like treating people like humans. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I'm like, my heart goes out to you that you went through that, but I think that like you using your voice to talk about this can definitely bring some awareness, and I
Mhm.
wish and I hope that you inspire more people to talk about their experience with that,
Yeah.
and that hopefully there will be a change soon. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
it's so it's so much to
Strong
unpack.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but now, so you are, did you say 8 years sober?
So when I got out, I had tried the program, and then I started drinking. So officially, my sobriety date is 3 years. Um,
Awesome.
but drugs in general and anything like that, it's been about 8 years. Yeah.
Awesome. So,
Yeah.
do you feel like your experiences, especially the fact that you experienced a lot of trauma at a young age, how do you think that's going to mold the way that you are as a parent? Like, how do you navigate through that as a mom?
I think it makes me a better parent. The fact that I've seen what happens on the streets, I've seen what drugs can do. For me, as an addict, I can spot another addict or somebody using drugs 10 miles away. I can just see it.
Wow.
I just know.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times it's funny because my friend will mention that. She's like, I don't understand how you can call that. But then you just look at the person, and then you realize, okay, they're probably struggling right now.
Yeah.
with my kids, they're, our oldest is 11. So she, none of them have experience going through anything like that. But at the same time, I can see the signs, early signs of what it could turn into. And I think that it helps me as a parent because, like for me, I was so sheltered when I was a kid. I was not taught about the dangers of drugs, the dangers of sex. I wasn't taught any of that because, we lived in a bubble, and it did a disservice to all of us, because then when we found that, it was so exciting, it was new, we could experience something that was just completely rebellious against what our parents had taught us. And now as a parent, I'm able to have these very real conversations with my kids and be like, listen, this is exactly what happens. I am a living
Yeah.
example of what
Yeah.
happens if you, if you do drugs, if you, have sex with somebody you're not in love with. Like, here's some examples. I will tell you
Right.
personal history. I'm very open and honest with my kids. I tell them anything, and now like they come ask me anything, and I know exactly what's going on pretty much at all times. And I know a lot of parents think that,
Yeah.
but literally my kids will come tell me anything. Like, we're just open books, and it's helpful as a parent.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's phenomenal too that you're also able to take your story and your
Mhm.
experience and say, you probably have better eyes to spot, insecurities or depression or anxiety or
Mhm.
things like that in young children because you experienced it yourself and you
Mhm.
knew what that can lead to. So you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and like we're gonna talk about this, like we're gonna work through this, and
Mhm.
that's amazing that like it's like a blessing that
Yeah.
I guess a blessing in disguise is kind of like the
Mhm.
proper terminology for that you can take an unfortunate situation, circumstances, and use that for good. So
The fact that I went through that is beautiful, so that they don't have to go through that.
yeah,
That's
that's
all I wanted to say.
amazing. That's no, that's an amazing way to look at it. So
Yeah.
I do have a few questions that I like to ask all my guests. So
Yay.
we're gonna jump right into those.
Mhm.
My first one is if you could remember, how would you describe your ambitions as a child and how you saw yourself and what you were capable of as a person?
I've always been a determined person. Those are like, it plays a part into pretty much everything that I do, whether I'm taking it in an extreme positive way or in an extreme negative way. I'm determined to get it done.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I really wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to do all these things. I had these ideas of how I was going to get married and what my life was going to look like. And it was just going to be perfect and beautiful. And I was going to make it happen no matter what. Um, and that plays a big part into like how it got so bad too, is just because that's part of my personality is I am like aggressive with things. I just want to see change, and I want to make things go the
Yeah.
way that I want them to go. But life, doesn't care what you want.
Like a
So
super strong personality, super like a
yeah,
go-getter. So that's awesome.
yeah.
What would you say has been your stickiest struggle that has stuck with you through your journey?
Um, since I was a child, insecurity, really,
Okay.
insecurity
Yeah.
plays a huge part in everything. And I see my girls go through it. I see them not feel like they live up to society's beauty standards. It's hard
Yeah.
because my kids are perfect. They're so innocent, they're so
Yeah.
young, but I already see like, okay, she's probably going to have some sort of eating disorder, and she's eating half of her meal, and
Yeah.
she's sad because her hair is too curly. It's horrible. And for me, that's something that I have had to really grow into, is like being comfortable in my own skin. And still to this day, there's like, I'll look in the camera right now and be like, oh my God, look how good my skin is, or, what is going on with my hair, and
Yeah.
just being like ugly to myself. And that's something that I've had to work on a lot, because I really hated myself at one point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
pretty
think
much.
that like I wish there was this magic wand that we could just wave over all of our girls. And I mean, I know that even, boys suffer from it too. I try
Mhm.
not to like discriminate in that field because I do know that men struggle with it too. But I definitely think that the standards and the target for beauty is way more on women than it is on men, especially young women. I know I have a 9-year-old, so I can totally I can
Yeah.
connect with you on that, and worried about eating too much and things like that. And then of course she's naturally slim, so she's one of the comments that she made to me the other day when we were school clothes shopping was, I'm shaped like a rectangle. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how
No, you're
how do I stop that? Like, I don't, all you can do is the best that you can do and tell them that they're beautiful and that, everybody's built differently and looks different. And,
right.
we're trying to help our children when we're struggling with it ourselves. But yeah, I can totally connect with you on that. That's probably one of the hardest struggles that,
Mhm.
just about everybody probably faces. But,
Yeah.
hopefully eventually we'll get to that point where we're just like, whatever, like,
Yeah, the movement that we're moving in as a society
yes.
is positive. I love
It
it.
is. I do love it too, and I just think that it's gonna do amazing things. Like
Mhm.
we're gonna get there. So,
Yes, we will.
my next question for you. So we already kind of like talked about your aha moment was when
Mhm.
you realized when you were pregnant in
Mhm.
prison. So I just wanted to highlight that again. That I think that's an amazing. I mean, you gave me cold chills when you said that. Like, I think that's amazing that that was that moment for you and that it didn't get further down,
Yeah.
and that you're still with us today. So my
Yeah.
next question would be, we like to talk about stepping into our own power and not thinking of that as a bad thing. I
Mhm.
know when we say powerful women, powerful men, you think of power, it's usually a negative thing. So we're trying to put a
Mhm.
twist on that with the podcast
Mhm.
and realize that we all have our internal power. How do you think of, or how would you describe the power that you try to step into every day?
That's a good question. I think the way that I see myself daily now is just to be of service to other people and like be the best mom and wife that I can be and the best friend that I can be and a good sponsor, the way that I like looked at myself before was I was this liar, a thief, a cheat. I was, snaky. I
Yeah.
wasn't a good anything. And so now when I when I realized I was pregnant, in my head I was like, I'm gonna be the best mom that I can be to this little girl. Like, I didn't know it was a little girl at the time. I had a gut feeling, but at that time I was like, you know what? This isn't about me anymore. Like, I'm so selfish. I need to be less selfish. I need to do this for other people. My family cares about me and they're all suffering right now. The people that care about me have to go through hell because of what I'm putting them through. And so daily, my goal when I wake up is to be of service to somebody else, to wake up and tell my story, no matter how many negative things people say about me or how society views it. I'm willing to put myself on the line to share my story because of the fact that it could help somebody else out. So that's my power is like, who can I help out of that darkness today? Like, who can I give some hope to?
that is that is so powerful. Like, oh my gosh, you continuously giving me cold chills here. So my last two questions, which are my favorite ones.
Mhm.
What is the best piece of advice that you have ever been given?
That you really only get one life,
Yeah.
so use it wisely.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone's ever said that to me, but I know that
You hear it
I've
a lot.
I've heard it
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, okay, you get one life. No one's going to remember what happened yesterday or the day before. So if you're wearing sweatpants, who cares? If you don't like if you don't have makeup on, who gives a damn? You
Yep.
only get one life and might as well like make the most out of it. And I know that's so cliche because everyone says it, but like really I try to embody that because like at this point in life, we have bigger fish to fry than like, any kind of beauty standard or
Yes.
anything like that. So
I love that.
yeah.
So my last question is, what's the best piece of advice that you would give a younger version of yourself who was in the
Mhm.
thick of struggle if you had just a few moments with them?
Uh, you know, um, I went through trauma therapy, right? So at one point, my therapist had me sit there, close my eyes, and envision myself now, who I am today, go back and give who I was, at my lowest point, sitting in there in the bathroom, shooting up drugs, give her a hug and just let her know that everything's going to be okay. And so that was really powerful for me because, at that time in my life, I saw no hope. I saw that there was no way out. But, really, if I was sitting there talking to a younger version of myself, I'd be like, look, there is a way out. There is stuff that can bring you serotonin that doesn't kill you. There is stuff that can make you feel happy, and it doesn't have to be this. And, let me show you how it's done, yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're so amazing. I love that. I want to thank you so much on behalf of our team and every single person that heard your story and connected with it. After the podcast, I will be heading straight to my easel and creating a painting that represents what I personally felt and saw from your amazing story of
I'm
transformation.
so excited.
Yes, I'm so excited to I can't thank you enough. Of course, if anybody's interested in seeing that process, you can follow us on Instagram. And of course, I will also link Sam's personal her Instagram if you would like, and then her TikTok. You can follow along her journey. And I'm sure I could probably speak for her when I say this. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to her, please do
Yes.
so. She is there for you. But yes, thank you so much for being on today. You are a complete inspiration. I know the future is holding amazing things for you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. And I want to thank my guests again for being on the show and sharing their incredible story of transformation with us. I'm going to link their social medias below so that you guys can give them a follow through their journey. If you personally felt connected to the story and you would like to purchase one of the limited edition prints that goes along with it, you can do so at my website, jessicajames.com. That's JESCAJAYMES.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at I Am Power Club. And of course, like and subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss next week's